More potential evidence is coming to the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection. Visitor logs from the White House that could reveal who former President Trump saw that day. CNN senior legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed has details.
The House Select Committee investigating January 6th will soon get a new window into what was happening in the White House that day when the National Archives turns over visitor logs from the Trump era. President Joe Biden refusing a request from former President Trump to keep those logs under wraps. Trump has repeatedly railed against the committee's investigation.
The Unselect Committee on January 6th. How about that committee?
But in a letter to the National Archives, White House counsel Dana Remus says Biden determined that shielding the visitor logs is not in the best interests of the United States and therefore is not justified as to these records and portions of records. The archives provided the documents to the current White House for review in late January. They include visitor logs showing appointment information for individuals who were processed to enter the White House complex, including on January 6th. Remus notes that the current administration voluntarily discloses such visitor logs on a monthly basis, with some exceptions, a practice also followed by the Obama administration, though both Obama and Biden excluded visitors who were purely personal guests of the first and second families. Biden has instructed the archives to provide the documents 15 days after its notification to Trump, unless a court intervenes. Trump could still sue, but he lost a similar case at the Supreme Court earlier this year when he tried to use executive privilege to block the committee from accessing more than 750 pages of his White House records.
I would say that this Supreme Court decision is probably the single biggest day of the investigation so far.
Now the committee appears poised to receive the logs, which may tell the committee location of the meeting down to the room number. Wolf, I should note these logs can be limited. They only record people who don't have a permanent pass to enter the White House. And even if you register to meet with one person, if you met with another official or in another location, like let's say the Oval Office, that may not appear on the log. So while these records will provide some information to the committee, they will not reveal the full picture of who is coming and going on the day of the insurrection.
Yeah, good point indeed. All right, Paula Reed reporting. Thank you very much. Let's dig deeper into all of this. Joining us now, our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, and CNN political analyst, Maggie Haberman, the Washington correspondent for the New York Times, and the author of a brand new book coming out later this year entitled Confidence Man, The Making of Donald Trump and the Breaking of America. Can't wait to go through that book. Gloria, how revealing from your perspective could these visitor logs be to the Select Committee?
Well, it really depends, Wolf, as Paula was saying. First of all, we know that this White House, the Trump White House, was not known for keeping meticulous records in the first place. So we don't know what records they actually have. Secondly, we just don't know. When you walk in there and you're recorded, are you meeting with the president? Did you go meet with somebody else? Did you go back and meet with the president? So it's really unclear what they're going to get. It's obvious that they have to try. They already know a bunch of names of people who were in the Oval Office during this whole altercation. They know that Rudy Giuliani met with the president on multiple times, John Eastman, the conservative lawyer. So we really don't know, but obviously the January 6th committee believes it's really worth trying.
You know, Maggie, as Gloria just said, these visitor logs might not necessarily reflect visits to the White House residence, or if someone was scheduled to visit one person, ended up visiting other people. How much of a problem could that be, trying to piece together former President Trump's actions around January 6th?
Well, I think the committee has always had a challenge when it comes to putting together the pieces of the former president's movements that day, of the people around him that day. And I guess I would raise another question that I'm not clear on. Gloria might be, or Paula might be, but I'm not clear on whether these are just the visitors' logs from January 6th, which candidly, just based on my real-time reporting, is probably going to reveal less than anything on the previous days or the days leading up to it if they're trying to understand what happened. And I don't know that those are available. What this tells me, Wolf, is I think they do have a challenge for a variety of reasons of trying to recreate what was happening that day. There are a lot of people who we know have dealt with the committee in some fashion or another who did have direct knowledge of what was happening that day in the White House, but there's a lot of people who didn't and who have also talked to them and who have speculated in one way or another. And so all of that, I think, compounds the challenge that they have. What I do think this speaks to is a willingness on the part of the Biden White House to not go along with the former president's claims of privilege. Increasingly, you're seeing them give up records and this standoff between the archives and the Trump White House.
Well, let me follow up, Maggie, with you, because between Trump flushing documents down the toilet, as you reported in your new book, to incomplete call logs, potentially incomplete visitor logs, is this a White House that tried to cover its tracks?
So I can't answer that question in terms of the flushing that I am reporting in the book and that I've talked about here previously. I don't know what the documents are. I don't know what the paper was that he was, putting in a toilet. I couldn't begin to speak to it. In terms of trying to cover its tracks, I think that speaks to motive that I also can't speak to because we do know, having covered this White House, that there was a lot of disorganization. We also know, or the previous White House, we also know, covering that White House, that there were times that they deliberately told us things that were not true. And so I think the job is going to be for investigators on the House committee to figure out what is what there. But at minimum, there is going to be, I think, a lot of holes in trying to put together that day.
You know, this is sort of a larger point about Donald Trump, which is that in my reporting, he didn't want anybody to know who he was talking to, for example, which is why he used staff cell phones, et cetera, et cetera. And, he is somebody who, as Maggie reported, was flushing paper down the toilet bowl. So instead of wanting to be open about things with the American public, and he was sort of trying to hide things for whatever reason. And it was this kind of paranoia that governed him. And I think that's what the committee is up against. And whether they can break through that and kind of chart his movements and his meetings minute by minute by minute is a real challenge. And they're going to have to find multiple ways to do that.
Yeah, they're collecting tons of information.
Yeah.
I got to say that. All right, Gloria, thank you. Maggie, thanks to you as well. Coming up, why President Biden has put Americans on alert that a war in Ukraine would be felt right here at home. Our Brian Todd has been looking into the potential impact. Brian, a Russian invasion could strike a very painful blow to the U.S. economy at a critical time.
At a critical time, Wolf, and at a time when Americans are already fatigued by COVID-related economic hardship. Tonight, we have new information for consumers on what to expect at the store and at the gas pump if Russia invades.
There could be impact on our energy prices. So we are taking active steps to alleviate the pressure on our own energy markets and offset raising prices.
President Biden promising his team will deploy all the tools at their disposal to relieve pain at the pump. Pain already being felt because of supply chain issues connected to the pandemic.
Every single aspect of my life is impacted by gas prices.
Russia is a major oil producer, second only to the U.S. If a war in Ukraine damages oil infrastructure, if sanctions are placed on the Kremlin's oil sales, if Vladimir Putin decides to halt exports in retaliation, gas prices in the U.S., already at an 8-year high of $3.51 per gallon for regular, could spike.
I think if you saw an invasion, they could go spike up 20%.
Other prices for energy could rise as well.
Think about heating your home. Think about keeping the lights on. Things like a plane flight are going to get more expensive. Driving to work is going to get more expensive.
Overall inflation could get worse as businesses raise prices to offset higher energy costs, and some goods or materials may see price volatility, and interest rates could also go up faster.
When interest rates go up, your debt payments on everything from your home to your car to education to really any kind of debt you might have, credit card debt, that all goes up.
And markets could see a stock sell-off, or at least more volatility, so our 401ks could drop. Another concern, cyber attacks. While Ukraine has been hardest hit, with banks going temporarily offline, the Colonial Pipeline hack in the U.S. last year shows hackers can easily disrupt America's economy. Just one attack on one company caused a price spike. Panic buying set in, and many East Coast gas stations ran out.
The Americans will feel that very imminently because it'll affect their access to power, to water. It'll affect their emergency services. That's a very big escalation if the Russians choose to do it. People's access to immediate cash and payments could be interrupted.
Now, what can the average consumer do to prepare for possible economic fallout of a Russian invasion? The experts we spoke to say there are a couple of things you can do without overthinking it. If you have debt, like high-rate loans for your home, car, or credit card, try to pay those down. And for people who invest, don't take big chances. Maybe be a little less aggressive in playing volatile stocks. Wolf?
Very good advice indeed. Brian Todd reporting for us. Thank you very much. Let's get some more on all of this. Joining us now, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas. Congressman, thanks for joining us. Let me get, first of all, your reaction to Brian Todd's report. What is the worst case scenario here for Americans if Russia invades, which certainly looks possible?
Well, I think several. I think gas prices would go up. I think NATO will be weakened. But let's not forget the reason why Putin wants to invade Ukraine in the first place. The legacy, it's the breadbasket of Russia, but he wants the ports to the Black Sea. He wants to control energy out of the Black Sea. I think the biggest mistake this administration made was waiving our congressional sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, allowing Putin to complete his pipeline into Europe, making them more dependent on Russian energy than the United States. Then shutting down Keystone in the United States. This whole movement against energy production in the United States, I think, has hurt us in being an energy independent nation and projecting that. So it's really intertwined, and I think the comments are correct. This is about world domination on the energy front, and Putin wants to be a dominator.
He certainly does. You know, Secretary Blinken says there's no meaningful pullback of Russian troops despite claims that are coming from the Kremlin. Are you still waiting to see if there's any drawdown, or do you believe the Russians are lying?
I think they're running a disinformation campaign. Well, on one hand, they say they want diplomacy. We're not seeing a lot of talk there. They talk about drawing down forces, de-escalating, when in fact our intelligence community and our geospatial shows they're increasing. On the border, 150,000 troops now, artillery, tanks, and planes. So I don't see any signs of de-escalation. So this is not working. And it could be a matter that we're in a window of a couple weeks now, right now, Wolf, when Putin will make this calculated decision. Is it worth it to go into Ukraine?
Because the latest Ukrainian intelligence, we're told, is that Russia doesn't have enough troops amassed to pull off a full-scale invasion. Based on everything you've heard, is that accurate?
Russia's in full frontal attack mode. They would overwhelm Ukrainian forces, starting out with the cyber attack, shutting down their infrastructure. Then you would see the artillery, the tanks, and the planes. It would be over in a matter of 2 to 3 days, and then the invasion is complete. And then we're in a post-Ukraine world with Russia dominating. You'd see a resistance movement after that. And then you look at President Xi, who's going to be looking at Taiwan as the next step in this shoe to drop.
We're just getting word, and this just coming into the Situation Room, Congressman, from a senior U.S. official, that Russia has increased its troop presence around Ukraine by approximately an additional 7,000 troops, 7,000 in recent days. We heard the president say, President Biden say the other day that the Russians had more than 150,000. Now it looks like they're getting increasingly closer to 160,000 troops. What does that say to you?
Well, we've been told all along 100,000, then 75,000 more troops that would come in from Moscow. I think that's what we're seeing, right now. And it is deceptive. They are lying. I think it's a disinformation campaign about a de-escalation to negotiate, when in fact they're escalating. The other thing, Wolf, I find of interest is the Duma, which is their parliament, basically passed a resolution to name the Donbass region on the east part of Ukraine as an independent state. This would allow Putin to do this false flag operation, if you will. If it's an independent territory by the Russians and Ukraine somehow meddles or interferes, then it would be the pretext for an invasion by Russia. I keep your eye on that one very closely, and Putin is saying they're committing genocide against the Russian separatists in the Donbass area as well.
Yeah, that's very, very alarming. This senior U.S. official now says, and I want to be very precise, that the U.S. government now has every indication that the Russians, mean only to publicly offer to talk, make claims about de-escalation, while privately they are, quote, mobilizing for war, direct quote from the senior U.S. official. Is any talk of diplomacy from Russia, from your perspective, Congressman, a ruse at this point?
Well, I believe that the senior official you talked to is correct. And I think the foreign minister is somewhat kind of walled off from Putin's hardliner team. What we're seeing is that Putin is now surrounding himself by his most hawkish supporters in his administration. And the foreign minister is kind of off on his own talking about negotiations. That's not a good sign. And the buildup that we've never seen before on the European continent, an invasion of which we haven't seen the likes of since World War II, is quite concerning.
But don't you think the Russians know, Putin knows, how severely punished they would be by the sanctions, not just from the U.S., but from all of Europe for all practical purposes? It would have a devastating impact on the Russian economy, and the Russians would lose thousands of casualties.
You would think so, and you'd think the threat of sanctions would deter him. I've been a proponent of sanctions before an invasion because he has been provocative. He's been aggressive on the border. This is started last March. It's gone on for almost a year now with little deterrence. And, you know, I thought the president's speech was candid, sobering, and powerful. But, you know, the rhetoric doesn't meet the actions, or maybe vice versa. I haven't seen deterrence really the key here. And that's what was necessary to stop Putin. He's got to make the calculation. Am I willing to go through these sanctions and possibly the shutdown of Nord Stream 2?
And you say this could happen within the next 2 weeks. We'll see what happens. Congressman Michael McCall, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Wolf. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Coming up, a young girl. Tonight, the U.S. says Vladimir Putin could pull the trigger on a Ukraine invasion any day as he keeps building up his forces despite his talk of a withdrawal. Our correspondents and experts are standing by in Russia, in Ukraine, and here in the United States. First, let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, the U.S. says Russian forces are moving into what are described as fighting positions. Give us the latest.
Yeah, Wolf, and they say that they are certainly not pulling back, despite those Russian claims yesterday that they were potentially engaging in a partial drawdown. Instead, the White House coming out today saying that they have seen no evidence of a de-escalation, and in fact, they believe they are adding to the forces that they've already amassed on Ukraine's border.
And unfortunately, there's a difference between Russia says and what it does. And what we're seeing is no meaningful pullback.
More Russian forces, not fewer, are at the border. And they are moving, concerningly, into fighting positions. This is cause for profound concern.
Today, we should note that President Biden did speak with the German chancellor, who recently traveled to Russia, met with the Russian president while he was there. They talked about those conversations and their efforts going forward for deterrence. But Wolf, we should note another concerning thing for the White House tonight are these new satellite images that they are watching showing some key construction in a very critical area in Belarus. That is, of course, another area that the White House has pinpointed as a serious concern for alarm when it comes to the troops that Putin has put there. And you can see what is happening here is road construction and a temporary bridge construction, a tactical bridge, they believe. And this is in an area by a river that's just about 4 miles outside of Ukraine. And so this is causing a lot of alarm here for officials at the White House who are watching this and believe that exactly these kind of steps are the steps that Russia would be taking if they were on the brink of an invasion. Not just preparing field hospitals, moving blood into the area, but also taking tactical steps like this one to make it easier to access Ukraine. So this is something that they are watching closely. And what officials are also telling CNN is only adding to their very, very emphatic skepticism of those Russian claims that they are moving any troops out of the area.
Caitlin, I want you to stay with us as we bring in our chief international correspondent, Clarissa Ward. She's on the scene for us in Ukraine. and CNN contributor on Russian affairs, Jill Doherty. She's joining us from Moscow. Also with us, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He's the former U.S. Army commanding general in Europe. He's also now a CNN military analyst. General Hertling, the State Department says Russian forces are moving into what are described once again as fighting positions. These new satellite images show this bridge that's being built less than 4 miles from the Ukrainian border. How ominous are these moves?
Well, first of all, Wolf, I'd correct the State Department and tell them that they should call those attack positions, not fighting positions. But secondly, what we're looking at is a lot of moves throughout the front, north, east, and south of Ukraine. All of those positions are dangerous, certainly. But as we've talked about, that bridge that you just described over the Pripyat River, leads right into the Pripyat marshes. This is some very difficult terrain. Wolf, and as you know, you were with us in Desert Storm. When you're talking about moving forces forward, especially a combined arms army the size of 150,000 soldiers, there's a lot of movement that's taken place. We have not seen that preparatory movement into attack positions. We have seen sort of the deception efforts, and the Russians have a word for that. They call it maskirovka, and they incorporate that in their tactical, operational, and strategic plans. So we're still not certain what they're going to do. Even though they may be moving forces around, there's no clear indicator that they are actually about to cross the border. But certainly there are concerns in all three areas around the boundaries of Ukraine.
Yeah, let's not forget, during Desert Storm, the U.S. deployed more than 500,000 troops in the Persian Gulf to liberate Kuwait at that time. Clarissa, despite warnings from the West that Putin could pull the trigger at any moment, are Ukrainians right now remaining defiant?
Well, I think the leadership certainly is, or putting on a very good show of doing so. President Volodymyr Zelensky had joked that today was supposed to be the day of invasion. Instead, he called it a national day of unity. He's been traveling around the country, meeting with servicemen, witnessing military exercises, saying over and over that Ukraine will not be intimidated by any enemy. And what's interesting, Wolf, is that CNN has actually had the opportunity to look at an exclusive intelligence report developed by the Ukrainians. And it's interesting to see how it's similar to the Americans, but also how it differs. So they say they estimate roughly 148,000 troops surrounding Ukraine's borders. That roughly gels with what President Biden had said, 150,000. But their argument is that they do not believe that is enough to launch an all-out invasion. And this is a consistent rift that we have seen between Ukrainian intelligence and U.S. intelligence, with Ukraine really trying to minimize this sort of emphasis or focus on the threat of an all-out invasion, because from their perspective, they're dealing already with so much pain and difficulty as a result of the destabilizing acts of Russia, not just in terms of this 8-year war, but in terms of cyber attacks, in terms of misinformation, in terms of political destabilization. And so what you're seeing, I think, really is an effort from Ukraine's leadership to shift the narrative and focus away from being exclusively on some kind of an all-out invasion and try to keep it in a place where at least there's less concern about panicking the Ukrainian public, and also addressing the multitude of ways in which Russia is already successfully destabilizing this country through this situation, Wolf.
Jill, you're in Moscow, and that the U.S. and the NATO allies are calling Russia out on its claim that some troops are returning to their bases. Russia's defense ministry even put out video to back up that claim. Is this part of Putin's attempt to try to retake the narrative and shape it to his own liking?
I think it is a way of using and exploiting contradiction and putting out a lot of different stories. I mean, if you look at the message from here, Russia would say, yes, we are pulling back some troops, not all, but some, and that those exercises in Belarus, some are coming to an end, et cetera. But, obviously, the contradictions just keep another ball in the air. And President Putin himself, look at what he's said over the past couple of days. He said, we want diplomacy to continue, But at the same time, he was using this word genocide, which is really a hot button word, to accuse the Ukrainian government of carrying out genocide against the Russian speakers in that critical Donbass region, the Russian speakers in the eastern part of Ukraine. So I think, overall, this can work for President Putin by keeping the contradictions going, by keeping the West guessing and trying to figure out what he is going to do. It's almost like shaking a tree, Wolf. Shake a tree, see what falls out, and maybe eventually you can weaken the Zelensky government by doing that.
Caitlin, how else is the Biden administration right now trying to stay a step ahead of Putin?
I think what's been remarkable is what they have revealed, because it goes so much further than what we saw even in 2014 when we were last in a pretty similar situation with this, talking to U.S. officials about how they were handling a threat like the one that they're facing today. And I think that you have seen them be very forthcoming with intelligence. They have declassified. They have not only made it clear to reporters what they are looking at and putting out figures and dates and what plans could be happening, but they're also sharing it with allies pretty readily. And I think that the constant calls that the president has had with other world leaders really do indicate that. And we've heard from officials, you've got to keep in mind, a lot of the people who are serving right now for President Biden were also here during the Obama administration and when this happened, when Russia illegally annexed Crimea in 2014. So they obviously have something that they are basing this off of, and they do feel it is better to put the intelligence out there. Maybe it could thwart or disrupt some of Putin's plans. And I think that is something they are trying to use to their advantage time and time again, and being very forthcoming with what they're seeing.